So it is actually completely opposite to the procurement rules of the World Bank and any major donors, because you can imagine that favoring local thing when you lend to a country, a government is not a good procurement approach. And our procurement people say, if that's, we say, oh, but it's the cheapest solution, then they say it will happen by itself. You don't want to write it in the tenders. So if you read carefully the Noor-Ouarzazate tender, it's not a requirement, it's a voluntary agreement, because it could not. It turns out that for Ouarzazate 1, the local content is 32% and is expected to be 35% for 2 and 3. So we achieved more than what the government wanted anyway. And if the conditions are right, the framework is right, the labor force is there, labor force is going to be cheaper, everybody has an incentive to develop some of the aspects in the chain of the CSP locally, at least some services and some of the components, maybe not the big ones. So if the markets work well, you should not have to put those requirements. Now, what we have done as part of the CSP program of the CTF is set up a technical assistance program of $10 million, where, and I think many things I heard today, there are a lot of things related. That's why I think it's important to talk about it, because it's helping set up the right condition for the local manufacturing and helping set up startups and companies like that. So when the tenders come out, there will be some capable local companies to form consortium and contribute, because it's always a consortium, not just one thing. So it's very much the same kind of objective as what I heard for KIC Energy, or complement to Irezen. We talk to Irezen regularly. And another thing that was done in Morocco by a trust fund called InfoDev is set up a climate innovation center in Morocco, which is to become a Maghreb climate innovation center if it ever works. And the purpose there, it's also helping to go from the research, development, innovation to real businesses. And they work as network of climate innovation centers around the world. There is one in Kenya, which is very successful, one in Vietnam, and they are mushrooming at the moment. And they are supposed to learn from each other. So create innovation, enabling environment. And then you don't have to put everything in the tender, because the companies are there, and that would make the most competitive tenders for the projects anyway.
Maybe one comment about that. When you say there is a lot of money for such project, I think there is a lot of money for large projects, but those projects are mostly given to large companies. And when you are an SME, it's a bit difficult to get funds from World Bank. Especially, for example, for a newer one project, it's the requirement. In the requirement, the company has to have a minimum of 50 megawatt of project already implemented. So when you are a startup, it's just impossible to have 50 megawatt. I don't know the new fund, the climate fund. Maybe it's more useful for SME. But for the large project, for us, I know it's really difficult. Sometimes we work with IFC, and with IFC it is more easier. But with the World Bank, it's not for SME.
Well, you mentioned what I was going to say. It's IFC. First, if it's purely private, it goes to IFC. World Bank does only with government guarantee. So in Agence Française de Développement, they go together. Secondly, the way the World Bank works and the project management rules and everything, it cannot deal with small projects. So it has to aggregate somehow and do lines of credit or something. But there are instruments, especially through IFC, and everything, everywhere I turn now, I hear we have activities, operation to promote SMEs everywhere, EBRD, EIB, and so I wouldn't be worried about you. And anyway, you wouldn't bid on a project like Ouarzazate alone. You will be part of a consortium. So I think, in my view, in all of the development financing institution, we call the IFI, try to privilege SMEs because they believe it's an important part of the economic development. So there are many, many tools available for that.
This brings back to a point about the famous triangle that has been mentioned several times today. A good triangle should have legs of equal distance to keep it very strong. But if you think about the cycle time, we talked about educational cycle time, research cycle time, and if it's industrial or especially startups, startup companies live with about a year of visibility at best, and sometimes 6 months of cash flow and things like that, which doesn't mean that we're fragile companies. We have to be very agile companies to be able to adapt to market opportunities. So this, from my point of view and what I've seen both at my company and other companies, international opportunities are complex, but is a very good way to get into new opportunities and to test the product and to show maturity.